Conference this Friday afternoon. We are so glad that you have joined us for this conference, and let me tell you, we've got a great one lined up here for the concluding session of our conference. I also want to take an opportunity to thank our event sponsor today, Verta Water Quality Systems, as well as First Case for their collaboration in the event and providing CE credits for it. Before we get started into this last presentation, I want to draw your attention to a couple of items around the screen. First, you'll see that resources window over on the side. In it, you will find some brochures and content provided by our event sponsor that you can download, as well as some bonus CE content. That's additional CEs that are provided above and beyond what's being offered in the sessions today. So make sure to check that out. You'll also find some instructions in there about how to get your CEs after the conference is over. Don't worry, it's very simple. You'll be directed there right after the conference concludes, but if you have any trouble, you can get your questions and answers in that document over there. In today's discussion, we have Jay Johnson and Orlando Cintron with us to talk about Around the Water Cooler, a conversation about water collaboration between facilities and SPD. For those of you who have worked in sterile processing or facilities, know how crucial this relationship is, particularly surrounding utilities and water. And so if you are this collaboration and this discussion is going to be dedicated to that important relationship between those two departments. And so we're going to bring out some key insights about how these departments work side by side, ensure the water used to clean and sterilize reusable medical devices is safe and effective for use. And so joining us today is going to be Orlando Cintron. He is the manager of perioperative support services and central processing at Memorial Sloan Kettering Cancer Center. He's got 20 years of sterile processing experience, is a champion of pursuing excellence for patients by advocating for continuous infection control measures, and is experienced in all aspects of operating room sterilization and compliance with regulatory agencies, expense reduction, asset management. He's just an all-around great guy. And Jay Johnson is a director of facilities operations at the same organization, Memorial Sloan Kettering Cancer Center. Also the co-creator and maintainer of the institution's water management program. And so over the past 2 decades, Jay has built a distinguished career as a business operations expert and a project portfolio manager within the healthcare industry. And so we have the unique opportunity to bring these two guys together from the same organization, from a clinical OR-SPD background, from a facilities water management background, how they work together and the importance of that relationship. So I'm excited to get this started. Before I bring those guys in, I want to mention one more thing. There is a Q&A section and an attendee chat section on your screen. Feel free to throw questions into those boxes as you think of them throughout the course of our discussion. This is going to be somewhat laid back and informal, and so if there's something that you would like to be further clarified, or if you have some additional questions two guys to answer, feel free to throw that in there right in the middle of the discussion. I'm going to keep one eyeball on that box so that I can, if we have time, pitch those questions to these guys, and we'll make it real interactive and fun. So with that, join me in welcoming in Orlando and Jay.
Hello, everyone.
Hi, everyone. Thank you, Bobby, for the introduction.
Yeah, absolutely. I'm super excited to have you guys here. Now, I know both of you have been in your individual roles for quite a while. Just to get things started off on the right foot, break the ice, if you will, why don't you tell us a real brief story about how you got into your current role, kind of what that career path looked like for you?
Orlando, would you like to go first?
Sure, why not? I started out in CPD back in 1994. I was a technician, growing my ranks along the way. I got to say that I grew into my role by starting out with some real pioneers in the field. You know, I started my career back in 94 with Nora Wykander. She was a pioneer, helped start CBSPD. She was also board member, helped fund New Jersey Healthcare Central Service Association. grew my ranks along the way, growing into a coordinator position at Hackensack University Medical Center back in 2020. And I got to say that, the biggest thing that drove the way and the path for me to get into my career was really developing trust amongst my leadership support team. So, from a coordinator position, hard work, dedication, being able to then join the New Jersey Healthcare Central Service Association, where I started out first by being I was a part of just the Atlantic City committee members, and then along the way, I grew myself by becoming the president of the organization. And I got to say that really hard work, dedication, trust led me into the management role and where I am today.
Awesome. Thanks, Orlando. What about you, Jay?
So I currently work at, as Bobby said, at Memorial Sloan Kettering Cancer Center, and have only had the opportunity to meet Orlando this morning. We work at different facilities and in very different capacities. But as he just mentioned to you, with his career ascension and his dedication to healthcare throughout his career, it's the reason why I've been here as long as I have, and I continue to be motivated and really inspired to be my best here. I've been in the healthcare industry for over 25 years, but the vast majority was in pharmaceuticals. And so some of the water systems that I helped support or design or implement over that time were a bit different. Water for injection and WIFI systems, for those that are aware, is a bit different, different USP guidelines, but it's all about the quality of the design and the implementation and really the training and maintenance of the systems, which we'll get into in some detail. I started my career in hospitals in 1996 as a facilities manager, and here I am back in facilities management, and it's quite a bit different than it was in the late 90s, as Orlando will attest to, and many of you on today's webinar will attest to. But it's been a great journey, and it continues for me. And what's great about not just water quality or central processing, it's as much as you know, or as long as you've been in the field, you're still learning. There's still development and new technology and new subject matter experts that are coming into the field, and so it's an exciting time to be and remain in healthcare.
Yeah, particularly related to water management, right? Those standards are continually changing. The technology for maintaining water is changing all the time. I've often heard that once you get into water management, you never leave it. Like once you've got water quality in your blood, it's just you got to stay in it. And so I'm not surprised to hear that that you're working in water management even outside of that pharmaceuticals environment that you had been working in. So really looking forward to this conversation. I guess we'll start things off by trying to learn a little bit more what it's like in each of those two different worlds, because a lot of times the operational side doesn't have a lot of interaction with facilities. So I'm curious at your organization, what kind of training do each of you have in your role for trying to understand what the other person does and what's important about the other person's role?
Jay, you want to take that one on?
Would you like me to start? Yes.
Sure.
Not a lot, unfortunately. And so a lot of what we learn is in the field on the job training, not as if we go through orientation to learn about central processing or what happens in the OR suites or what happens in the laboratory spaces. You kind of learn as you go, but you learn rather quickly because more often than not, when you're in the facilities environment, you're partnered with when you start, especially if you're green and you're relatively inexperienced. The better institutions that are geared more toward a productive learning environment will partner you with someone that's more seasoned, that's been around the block, that knows what's important and what's considered a critical system, how to retrieve that system when it's either interrupted or if it's down for a certain period of time. And so I've had the unique honor really to work with some very seasoned veterans when I first came into healthcare, and even when I first started in this physical plant. I know enough to be dangerous now, but it's only through being partnered with some of the really seasoned veterans. But to answer the question, Bobby, there's no, at least in my experience, and I'm sure we're no different at Sloan as other facilities, it's not as this formal training documentation or seminars that you attend to learn about Central Sterile or to learn about CPD. And even if there were, there's nothing that takes the place of hands-on experience in the space. When you are a part of project teams, so if it's a small or even mid-size capital project in a space like CPD, that's where you learn the most. I mean, you learn the most when things go wrong, of course, but also when you're looking to conduct upgrade. When things are going well, you don't learn much, right?
Right.
And I worked at some facilities where it's challenging shoestring budgets and staffing shortages and no overtime available. And that's where you learn the most. But that's where I got a lot of my gray hair as well. And so it's not something you necessarily want to do your entire career. But
right.
Back to the point about projects, when you're upgrading a specific area like Central Sterile, that's when you learn the ins and outs, the operations, what can be interrupted, what cannot, and how to conduct a project with the least impact possible to quite frankly, one of the more critical areas within the hospital. Central Sterile is really paramount to what we do in supporting the operating suites.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think you'll get a lot of amens from this audience about the importance of that department. And so it sounds like from your perspective, even in the quality, the water management programs, that the training and knowledge in regards to sterile processing is very reactive and not so proactive. What's your experience been like, Orlando, about learning about what goes on in the facilities department and the water quality management program?
So I got to say that here at Memorial Sloan Kettering, my experience had been very informative. I got to say that our plant operations teams, and especially since I'm a smaller facility where I'm at right now, I've had the opportunity to actually go into the space to get those walkthroughs, to get to understand what are some of their day-ins and day-outs that plant operation has to make sure is getting done, not only for regulatory requirements, but also to meet our needs and to give us the quality system that we currently have. Prior to Memorial Sloan Kettering, there was very few interactions. But I got to say what's been informative to me is the great group of folks that I've been able to collaborate with here, building that partnership and understanding just the day-to-day people, right? These are hardworking men and women that are supporting us, that are working day in and day out to make sure that we are successful. And it's a different understanding once you know that. I think that, what I've also done is I'm also a member of Amy, and I sit on the new water quality development committee that is currently, in the process of converting a TIR into a standard. So I've taken that extra initiative to try to understand what exactly our plant operation team does. And I got to tell you that many, many times over, some of the conversations about water quality, hardness, and all of the things that are very technical and real to them was way over my head, right? Not something that I need to understand in CPD. But I got to say that very informative in the fact that there are a lot of things that affect CPD that plant operations was not aware of. And growing that relationship, building that relationship has, created a different understanding, a lot more respect for the people that support us without us even knowing and what they do.
Yeah, that relationship is paramount. Probably every sterile processing professional attending our conference has some story that they'd love to share about some surprise that happened because of a lack of communication between the clinical side and the facility side. And so we'll dive into some of that. So as we start to take a deep dive into each of your separate worlds, we'll start with you, Jay. Can you give us just a brief overview of what a facilities department supports in a hospital? What kind of things are they responsible for? What kind of skill sets do they have to have in their role?
Sure, absolutely. So in New York City, there are certain certificates of fitness that are required by FDNY. If you've got high pressure steam in your facility, that's a specific ticket that you need. We're required to have our refrigeration licenses, and that's predominantly to run the central chiller plant. And so in years past, it was the type of thing that you could work toward. So if you were someone with good mechanical skills and you demonstrated your ability to work in an environment like this, but you didn't have the reefer ticket, we would work with you. And some folks went to night school, and it's still a 240-hour commitment, followed by a written and a practical exam. And now we've really kind of upped the ante and raised the bar in terms of prerequisite tickets that you need to have. You need to have your hot work permits, your refrigeration tickets, steam licensure, depending on the facility. And so there's certain base requirements that are required just by law. And in addition to that, we want to make sure that the person is not someone that has lots of other commitments outside of the facility. We've actually gotten into trouble in the past where we didn't specifically ask that question. And with plant operators in particular, not so much with the staff that I manage, but plant operations, which is a group I managed for 4 years here. A lot of times at facilities, they watch engineers, so they're not running around. They're stationary engineers. And so it was not uncommon for these candidates to apply for a position after already having a full-time spot somewhere else. And folks on the call, I'm sure, are aware of what I'm talking about. That's problematic. That lends itself to issues. And so we would come right out and ask, are you okay with this being your primary responsibility? In other words, if we have a ship that's uncovered, we need to know that you can stay back. And there are certain areas that we can't leave unattended, obviously. And so that's something that we can actually ask that aren't, say, hard skills or tangible things. It's more around our expectations and whether or not you fit in with the culture here at MSK. And again, back to my original point about folks like Orlando that really kind of dedicated themselves to the cause. If you don't buy into that and it's not patients first, you're probably not going to be a good fit in our facility or any facility that patient care is of the utmost importance.
Yeah. You alluded earlier to facilities management being very different than it was back in the 90s. Is that requirement for certification a big part of that?
It's evolved into more of a prerequisite, but I would say one of the biggest changes we've seen is on the automation side. And so I'm thinking back to years past when I was learning about Honeywell systems and building management systems were more or less in their infancy. Lots of the building systems were pneumatic controls, and we've since gone digital. Everything's DDC in some of the newer facilities. And like the integrated Siemens BMS that we have now, it takes up an entire wall. There must be 40 screens. And so it's a bit overwhelming, especially if you're a plant operator coming from a facility where you may have been budgetarily challenged or you didn't have the same kind of building management system or automation that we do here. But it's an area that we invested in heavily, which is a difficult sell. And in the previous presentation, Don was getting into that quite a bit in terms of how that can be difficult to sell to administration. But when you see what the savings possibility might be on the labor side down the road and eliminating some of the human and operated error that comes with not being automated, oftentimes it's a wise investment.
Gotcha. So in your role then, what are some of those things that you've learned over the years about sterile processing departments that have been valuable for your team to know that maybe isn't common knowledge? So understanding where the redundancies lie and don't happen to be within Central Sterile is rather important. If you know you have N+1 redundancy in the sterilizer, let's say, for instance, that will allow you to schedule maintenance, downtime, whether it's your contractor coming, if it's steerist to do an overhaul of the machine, or if it's something we're handling on the steam side or the water supply side or condensate side. Understanding where you don't necessarily have an N+1 redundancy and how the very short durations you may be allotted, you need to stay within. Otherwise, you're affecting operations downstream. It's also good to know where there may be support from other facilities. I think in Orlando's case, he's more or less a standalone facility. Where we are on the Upper East Side of Manhattan, there are other facilities that we own and operate where we have Central Sterile equipment. But that's something we need to tap into in the event that we're midstream in maintenance, that things go sideways on us, where there's an unexpected turn during an overhaul, and you don't have that redundancy. You need to be able to call upon that equipment from that's sterile, sealed equipment coming from another facility to prepare for other OR cases. So all of those things you need to
it comes with experience. You learn over time. You wouldn't necessarily, if you came into a facility like this and you've worked in a museum or a library previously, steam is steam, condensate is condensate, and water is water.
Right.
But you wouldn't have seen central sterile, and so that's only something you would learn by being in an environment like this.
Yeah, that's really helpful. And that discussion about redundancies are important on for both departments, I suppose. If you're going through a renovation or a new construction, planning some equipment redundancy in can be a really valuable thing, so that if you do have equipment failure, you're able to keep the flow going, or if you have a disruption due to water or steam or something like that, that you're able to keep going. So that's really helpful. Orlando, I guess likewise question pitched to you. What have you learned about your facilities management team that's helped you better communicate and collaborate your needs with them?
Well, I think that, I've run across many scenarios, and I got to take one, for instance, there. I happen to be in work in a sterile processing department, and it was heavy rain, and next thing you know, we had water just pouring into our sterile processing department. And it isn't until you see these guys go into action, just coming inside and putting their all into it, that you really understand how important facilities is to us. I've had many instances, whether it's power outages that have affected our sterilizers, being able to run on backup generators for long periods of time to be able to maintain surgery and keep what is currently in the process of being sterilized, working and operating, has been, phenomenal for me. I think that, I've learned that, there is a lot of hard work that goes on behind the scenes. And, prior to actually meeting this group, I used to always believe that, people didn't know who central processing is, and I thought we were the only group of the healthcare industry that really wasn't recognized for the hard work and dedication that we do, and, who are really essential to healthcare outside of the clinicians. But, in over the years and over the experience, you really grow to realize and respect how much work plant operation has to do day in and day out, and how important it is for us, all of us, whether it's the patients or the staff that are in the department or just visitors that are in the space. It is their hard work that's happening behind the scenes that really keeps us working well together. So to me, what I've learned is that you really have to build that relationship, right? I think that understanding who these guys are very important, and females. So, we do have, females in our facilities groups as well. So, understanding that this team is critical to us, understanding that building good relationships is only going to help with the collaboration and understanding. And, I think also making sure that you're not overblowing the situation, right? Because I think that I've run across many instances where before I understood what plant operations did, the focus was mainly around what I do in CPD, and you don't understand how important it is for me to have what I have, good water quality, that my instruments are not staining, right? But I really don't understand that there's a lot of logic and science behind it that plant operations really understands, and really understanding their expertise and their opinions and how valuable that is to us is key.
Yeah. Yeah, seeing them as collaborators and as partners. Yeah, that's helpful. So to introduce our discussion, we've gone through the importance of having that relationship, but let's unpack that a little bit and talk about how to foster that type of collaborative working environment between these two departments. So in your opinion, what are those must-have meetings and communications that these two teams need to have to be aligned in a typical hospital setting?
So I think if there's any Go ahead, Jay.
No, Orlando, go ahead, please. I'll remember my point.
Okay. I think, those must-have, must-dos are, when we have sterilizer failures, right? I think those are those must-have, must communicate, must be able to meet and talk about how can we get these failures out of here. I think wet packs within sterilizers is a big one within CPD that, those are times where we really need to understand and get into the meats and bolts and really partner with not only your equipment manufacturer, but also your plant operations teams, because they play a large part in how steam and water quality is coming into our sterilizers. So I think that, when it comes to sterilizers, that's a huge one for us. I think that, there's a bigger need growing in healthcare institutions for water quality when it comes to reprocess and medical devices, especially when we're looking at reprocessing flexible endoscopes. There's a high priority around that. I think there's high priority around our manual rinse, our final rinses within there, and understanding the importance of that quality of water. And when we don't see that quality, being able to have a good communication and a resource person in plant operation is essential.
So you need to have your guy that you can reach out to, that relationship already built. And you talked about some of those trigger moments that we need to have a reactive discussion about how to prevent this from happening again. Are there any, proactive meetings that you're having with your facilities team, or regular calls that you have to update on things or learn from things? One thing to pull out from your introduction that surprised me is that you got a tour through your water quality systems and your facilities management team just to learn about the equipment, what all goes into it. I think that's a great one. But is there anything else kind of on a proactive, collaborative sense that you do with your facilities team?
So, we have a proactive partnership in some of the maintenance and programs that we have in place to support our water quality systems. We have outside resources that are coming inside that need to do treatment of our water quality systems. And there are monthly maintenance, quarterly maintenance, testing that needs to happen. And I think that I have a good collaboration with our team here to be able to be partners in that with plant operation and that outside vendor to make sure that we are working collaboratively, not only for me to understand what's happening, to be proactive and reduce those issues, but also to be have the knowledge necessary so that when we have surveyors coming into our healthcare institution, such as State Department of Health or Joint Commission, and they're asking us these questions, that frontline users really understand and can speak to what our processes are. And I think that was absent to me. For me as a manager prior to joining Memorial Sloan Kettering, I didn't have that kind of relationship or even understanding. And I think that was one that was key and essential here at Memorial.
For sure. What about you, Jay? What are those real practical, proactive steps that you have found helpful in aligning these two departments?
So if we go back to the example of construction happening within CPD, which it does occur, very challenging. We'll often have the CPD staff present during design meetings, pre-construction meetings, mid-construction meetings, and then commissioning. Any qualification steps they'll be invited to, of course, and then turnover. In terms of day-to-day maintenance, I was reminded by something that Orlando said earlier. When I started in plant operations and we were supplying CPD with clean steam and domestic water for scopes washing and supply for the sterilizers, I remember asking my staff about the downtime within CP. Okay, so what are our windows of opportunity when can we work? And they said midnight to 4 a.m. And I thought it was a joke. And I asked another supervisor, he said midnight to 4. And I said, okay, well, I'm the new manager. I'm going to go over, meet with my counterpart there and come up with a better answer, and the answer I came back with was midnight to 4. And that was predominantly based, again, and my supervisors and rank and file staff got a big kick out of that. Who did this guy think he was going to go over there and dictate the schedule? But at the time, and still, thankfully for us, we have procedures going well into the night, every night of the week, with the exception of Sunday, and then they start again at 6 a.m. And so those sterile instruments need to be at the ready at any given time. And so working within that 4-hour time frame, it sometimes takes you an hour just to set up, just to build a partition, or just to bring in negative air machines and really kind of set up the pre-con activities. So for work that needs to be on it requires more than a 4-hour duration. The group needs to be very creative, not just the engineering group, but the facilities management group, but the CPD folks as well. We're in the process right now, and I don't know how familiar Orlando is, or if he's spent time at CPD main campus, of changing a grease trap. So there's a grease trap project, major undertaking, that's being done now above CPD. So CPD sits below our cafeteria, and our cafeteria or kitchen area is a washdown area. But we're talking about a floor with a lead pan that's 30, 40 years old. So when I first started here, it would occasionally rain down in CPD, literally. And so you can imagine, some of the headaches that we've gone through, just as CPD is trying to conduct their normal operations, and we're getting a call, hey, there's water coming. They weren't really descriptive in terms of the amount of water. It was literally raining from the floor above. And so when you're undertaking major construction like that, and trying to minimize impact to CPD, all of those necessary touch points and interactions that need to take place have to be standard, and you have to have, as Orlando said, that working relationship with our partners between facilities and CPD, because you can't simply say this is the window you have and that's it. And we can't simply say we don't work these hours. It's all hands on deck. Everyone is really making the contributions that they can to try and get the job done and allow for operations to continue with its central sterile.
And I want
to make, Bobby, sorry,
Go ahead.
The point about ICRA and PICRA, for those that are familiar, infection control risk assessment and the pre-construction risk assessment, paramount to all the things we do in a place like CPD, and so that's another touch point or an area where we need to collaborate quite a bit. Sorry.
No, yeah, that's good. And I wanted to highlight just that whenever there's any discussion about department renovation, new construction, bringing in new equipment, scheduling some kind of downtime, those are the moments when this communication is most critical, right? You don't want to build something out in sterile processing and have a clinical oversight, and then the users get there to use it, and it's not going to work. It's positioned wrong. It doesn't have the right features. The door swings the wrong way. There's all kinds of things. And so just having that practical user at the table in those construction meetings is really important. And vice versa, the sales reps can sweep the CPD leader off their feet with all these great promises of how something's going to work. But then whenever you talk to somebody from facilities management, there's no way we can get that kind of power to that location because of something in the floor, that we just don't know about. And so, yeah, those types of discussions are absolutely crucial. Narrowing this discussion about just communication between the two departments in general, for the purpose of our conference, let's zero in on water quality a bit. Whenever a water quality issue is identified, what are some helpful insights to keep in mind as these two departments work collaboratively to fix it? And I guess related to that, what are some things these two departments should not do whenever a water quality issue comes up?
So we're in the process now of rolling out our fully fleshed out water quality management plan. It's always existed in some form, but as we know now, there are new regulations, there are new standards and new guidelines that we need to follow. And so ASHRAE 188 is really our guiding document in terms of fleshing out that full water management plan, which I think now is at about 35 pages. It started with a 6-page document. We've collaborated now across all different groups within the facility to get a good cross-section of representation, from infection control to the different end users, safety, environmental services, certainly facilities, and even vendors that specialize in water treatment that we contract with and have a good standing relationship with MSK. The key when there's a water quality issue, of course, is to be upfront and honest and very timely with regard to the response and the communication. And so one of the things that that ASHRAE 188 stipulates is that you establish a team, you clearly define roles and responsibilities, and that the onus is not on a single person. That being said, they still want one person reporting out the Department of Health if need be. But at the same time, they want all the subject matter experts from their respective areas to weigh in to determine when a change to the plan needs to happen, when the sampling plan needs to be amended, and then what risk mitigation, and this gets back to your question, Bobby, what happens when you have an incident? What happens if you have a flora, or if there's a Legionella detected, or some other water quality issue that needs to be addressed? They want you to list out in your water management plan all the respective steps, whether it's a single fixture that possibly tested positive, or it's a riser, or it's water coming off of a heat exchanger, or a point of use that's been detected with a high pH or high conductivity. And so depending on the severity, where it takes place, and whether or not it's isolated, your water management plan should clearly delineate what the next steps are. And you start out small, right? You don't look to chlorinate your your gravity tanks on the roof. You don't want to start with something that's extreme. You want to try and attack the problem at the source first, and then slowly change your treatment paradigm based on effectiveness of the first wave, second wave, third wave, so on and so forth.
Sure. Orlando, what do you think about how to work collaboratively with facilities when a water quality issue is identified?
So I think that, understanding the length of time that it's going to take to address, the concerns that are brought about, how serious is this water quality system affecting our instrumentation? Time it's going to take, right, to actually get the situation under control. And who do I need to notify if the situation is going to expand further where it really affects the operating room or any other department that central processing supports, right? Because I think at the end of the day, understanding how long the issue is going to take to get rectified, it's critical to CPD. Because at the end of the day, we have patients coming in, and it's not only our operating room, right? You think of a labor and delivery department that is heavily reliant on CPD, and how long an issue is going to take affects whether or not surgery can still go on, right, on the following day, because you just don't have enough instrument to support a week's worth of surgery on hand. Where central processing is, we're turning over many times for the same day, let alone the next day and they're out. So understanding how long it's going to take, and then making sure that, all of our affected users who rely on CPD for their instrumentation understand what's going on so that we can escalate up not only to those users, but even our clinicians, right? Our docs need to know some of the challenges that we're facing. So it's important to understand the longevity of how long the issue is going to be to be rectified. And also how important is it to us, and what other action plans can we take within central processing to keep operation. And that's where, as Jay said, infection control plays a big part in that as well.
Bobby,
Yeah, it
can I
does.
just add something to sorry, Rob.
Of course, yeah. Go ahead.
Thank you. Something that Orlando just made me realize. Here's the rub, right, guys? Orlando works in CPD, and his first question, and if I sat in his shoes, I would have the exact same question. When is this going to be fixed? And that's just about the only answer I can provide. In a case where we have, water quality issues, let's find out what the source is, what's contributing to this, how do we stop it, how isolated is it, so on and so forth. So there's so many unknowns on our end that as the end user, that probably seems like an unacceptable answer. We don't know how long it's going to take. How can that be? But right. It's not until we do some serious investigative work to understand what we're up against and what mitigating steps we can take, and maybe they'll be effective, maybe they won't. But as you become more experienced on the water supply side, you you have encountered these things before, hopefully, and you know roughly how long it may take if you have to flush and retest, so on and so forth. It may be hours, it may be half a day. But the idea, of course, everyone's on the same page in terms of escalating the issue as quickly as possible. One of the things that you asked in your original question, Bobby, is what not to do. Don't sit on that information. Once you become aware of there being a water quality issue, that you're not going to solve it yourself. It's not going to go away. It's only going to get worse. And so you have to escalate that and get the right people involved immediately.
Yeah, absolutely. And I guess when we say water quality issues, there's a whole host of what that could be, all the way from a full outage that halts operations in sterile processing. We're replacing a steam supply pipe or a water supply pipe that's going to be supplying water to the washers and sterilizers, or it could be the municipality water that's coming in from a supply perspective to the organization is experiencing a problem, like a boil water advisory or something like that. Or it could be something that's a lot more subtle, and the equipment failures that maybe are hard to detect are perhaps the times when it's most difficult to be collaborative. I'm thinking of things like a water softener not working the way that it should, and we're just noticing that the detergents don't seem to be as effective in sterile processing as they used to be. Or sterile processing randomly started detecting some sediment in the water in the sinks, like little flakes coming out of the sink, and come to find out, facilities was, blowing down their boiler and doing some maintenance on it, and some sediment ended up downline in the sinks in sterile processing. Those types of smaller, just daily maintenance equipment issues can sometimes be difficult for the clinical team and the engineering team to see eye to eye, both on the importance on the clinical end and of having that correct water, that's all the equipment working properly. And to Orlando's point, it maybe sterile processing is not so patient in understanding the complexity and the importance of all of this maintenance that goes into it as well. Either of you have any stories of surprises like that have happened, or maybe misunderstandings between departments and what we can do to collaborate in those types of environments?
Just one thing I wanted to share. It's not exactly answering your question, Bobby, but it pertains to something that you mentioned just previously in terms of what can go wrong on the water quality side. When I first started here, I was lucky enough to be working with some real subject matter experts on the water side. Water treatment, not just potable water, but on the condenser water and chill water side as well, to extend the life of piping within the facility. Some of the buildings here are rather old. And we started to gather data on incoming water where the hardness level was rising. What made me think is, you mentioned a water softener, something like a water softener that shuts off or trips out could result in that. But we didn't have softeners everywhere in the facility, so I started to ask why that was, and why is it only in this building, and why do we only use it certain times? And what I came to learn is that the reservoirs that feed New York City, right, it's Croton Reservoir in particular, there are a bunch of different watersheds, and depending on which water source the water is coming from, and it changes. They, for one reason or another, probably based on level of rainfall, they may change unexpectedly, and there are different mineral deposits coming from that reservoir, which can greatly change the hardness coming all the way to New York City. So it's something like that you never really know or give much consideration to, but it's completely out of your control until you see it. There's nothing really that you can do preactively, or proactively rather, preemptively, until you see the hardness levels rising, and then you have to try and be reactive and solve through a softener or some other means. So I just wanted to share that information. That was a great learning experience for me.
Yeah, thanks for sharing that. And in a previous discussion, somebody mentioned that water is not like a static piece of equipment. It's dynamic. It's always changing. Just because your water is fine today doesn't mean it's going to be fine tomorrow. And so having a water system designed that is resilient to be able to handle those fluctuations, and you have the ability to reposition and correct things on the fly is definitely important. One of our listeners threw a question in along the same lines of what we're talking about in terms of collaborating over equipment issues. They've been noticing some staining on some surgical instruments, and have a recommendation from the manufacturer that the reverse osmosis system should be changed out every 4 to 5 years, but it's been 11 since the equipment's been serviced. And so there's a little bit of finger pointing going back and forth between facilities and sterile processing about what ought to be done with that piece of equipment, whether it's working appropriately, things like that. Any advice either into that specific conversation around reverse osmosis systems and changing out those filters, or just in general in terms of collaborating around that type of situation?
Jay, any insight on that?
I can speak to the RO systems as it pertains to our adiabatic humidification systems, which are tied into our water management plan. We outsource that, so it's an example of something that we'll look at DPs across filters. We'll look to see on our end through plant operator rounds when filter media or membrane might be replaced. But we outsource that largely. Evoke was actually the company that we work with pretty closely on the RO and DI systems. I haven't seen what with the question that's posed, I haven't seen that in terms of staining on instruments before. That might be something Orlando has seen, but I can't speak to frequency. It depends on the water quality, of course. 11 years certainly sounds like much too long a period of time. Even 4 to 5 years seems rather long to me, but I would never claim that I'm a subject matter expert in terms of RO membrane material and when it should be changed out.
Yeah, I got to say that I've had many experiences in my prior to joining Memorial Sloan Kettering where instrument staining was a huge problem for us. And, we've tried purchasing new instruments. We've reached out to plant operations about RO system. And really, prior to coming to Memorial Sloan Kettering, it was always a tug of war between plant operations and the RO system, and one finger pointing at the other, and I never had that resolved. I got to say that there are systems out there that can do away with it. I've been 5 years operating here at Memorial Sloan Kettering, and just as Jay alluded to, we do have Evoke on site who does our RO system here. And during our tenure here, we've never seen that instrument rusting scenario happening. It did have run across a few scenarios where during sterilization, post-sterilization, we've seen some instrument staining happen in there. But I think that, through continuous calls to our manufacturer of our sterilizer, we were able to iron out what the challenge was, and they made the repairs and they were able to see it. I think that apart from instrument staining, what I've also run across here recently was staining in my washer. The amount of white residue that was coming behind in our system, in our washer, was really a trouble. And, there was a lot of tug of war and finger pointing between, the RO system and the manufacturer. And believe it or not, in that particular instant, it turned out to be an issue with the chemical that we were using in our washers to clean. And by changing them out, we were able to address that issue and bring it to an end, which, wasn't the washer, wasn't the actual RO system, but the chemicals that we were using to clean in the washer that was the cause. So it's a hard task, I gotta say. And, going back to that original question, I would definitely push towards looking at that RO system, because there is means of correcting the issue, and I've seen it firsthand.
Yeah, thanks for sharing that insight. It definitely is complex. I think you're right to be questioning that critical rinse at the end, because that is what should be preventing a lot of the staining and water spotting. Rusting, believe it or not, is most likely to happen on a brand new instrument. As instruments are manufactured, they go through a passivation process where an oxide layer is built up on the outside of the instrument and iron particles are removed from it. And that process happens naturally, just with stainless steel. It naturally builds up that passivation layer. They try to accelerate it in the manufacturing process by putting it through an acidic bath. But when you get the instrument brand new out of the package, that's actually when it's at its most vulnerable. And so if you experience that your brand new instruments rust more than the ones that have been around for 4 years, it's for good reason. That's not to say that you should expect your instruments to rust out of the washer, though, right? So
Right.
it does indicate that there's something wrong. But if you think it's curious that it's happening more with the new instruments than the old ones, it's not only that they don't make things the way they used to make them. It's also just, the chemistry of what's going on with the makeup of that metal. And so, yeah, definitely continue to have that discussion. Be open to consider some other factors that might be at play in terms of your utility water or the chemicals that are being used in cleaning the instruments. But yeah, it does seem like questioning the critical rinse at the end of it is a good place to start. For you two guys, as we are getting close to wrapping up this discussion, I'm curious to know what professional guidelines and updates related to your roles in water quality do you read, research, listen to? What kind of conferences do you attend to keep yourself up to date on water quality issues?
So I'll start. I changed roles about a year ago. I was in plant operations previously, and the bulk of my water knowledge pertained more to treating the condensed water and chill water side, as I said, less so on the domestic water side. And then in the last year, I've been working over all of the trade shops, plumbing being one of the shops, and my current manager is published in water quality, and he's actually presented to Congress on more than one occasion in D.C., and so I had no choice but to come up to speed very quickly because he wasn't about to have someone on his staff that didn't know a lot about water quality. So I had to like it. But I actually was recommended by him to attend. It's ASSE 1280, American Society of Safety Engineers, water quality certification course, which I took. Great experience. I would recommend it to anyone who wants to know more about water quality. If there are folks out there that haven't attended that or pursued that training, it's interesting and will bring you up to speed at a rate that's digestible if you don't come from a water background. But at the same time, it can be challenging, and I think if you want to build upon your knowledge base beyond that, it's definitely recommended. But it's a recognized certification as well. It's a good resume builder and something I think if you work in facilities management or are genuinely interested in water quality, it's something you may want to pursue.
Yep. For the audience and my benefit, could you give us the name of that program one more time?
It's ASSE 12080, Legionella Water Safety Management Specialist Certification.
Thanks, Jay.
Mm-hmm.
And I think for me, what I've done, obviously water quality is not the highest priority for CPD previously. So, for what I've done for me to learn is, being an AME member, I joined the Water Quality and Reprocessing of Medical Device Committee and, start to learning more about the background of what's needed to manage the program. I've attended a few seminars as well. But for central processing, there's not a lot of background knowledge that's required. But I felt like, joining a committee or a group that are guiding experts in the field and directing could only help me grow my knowledge so that I could better understand why is it so important to us, and, what are some of the causes that I've seen previously that may have contributed to staining and water quality, and instruments, instead of being chrome, almost look brownish, so to speak. And you don't know if it's longevity use, if it's a natural occasion, as you mentioned, Bobby, passivation, right? Is it that part of that natural process of that instrumentation? But I got to say that, again, having a good water quality system is essential for central processing. because I haven't seen that staining anymore. And because we don't see that staining, and as Jay alluded, he's been at MSK for many, many years now, and he hasn't seen that water staining at his other sites that he manages. So I would say that having a good water quality system and understanding and being a part of that voice and continuing to champion and, you know, express the need for more information or more to be done to reduce it is going to be important.
Absolutely. Do you all know of any things that are coming down the pipe in the next 5 or 10 years that you expect is really going to change the way that these two departments are going to have to interact with one another and interface?
I think on the utility side, what we're seeing, anyone that's close, that works on either of the coasts actually, and those that work in the New York City or metropolitan area are very familiar with the what's being called the electrification of the city of New York City. And there's a big push toward getting away from greenhouse gas emissions and fossil fuels in general. In our main campus, we're still reliant on steam, sterilization, and steam heating with regard to the sterilizers in CPD and some glass wash areas and cage wash areas in laboratory spaces. And so as an engineer, it's tough for me to get my head around, how we're coming up to temperature appropriately to kill microbials and to provide that sterilization effect without the use of steam. I know it's done, but we don't do it here. And so if we're just going to be on the electrical grid with regard to sterilizers moving forward, that's going to be a challenge for us in maintaining the appropriate temperatures. One of the reasons why we've essentially gone away from con edison steam in every area except for CPD and the glass washing areas, as I mentioned before, and steam turbines, which are, the prime mover, they were likely to be converted to electric drives. And then you're really just looking at CPD. And so it's probably going to happen in less than 5 years, to be honest with you, Bobby, but that's something that will change. That's, concerns some of us a bit. And then the advent of automation, as I mentioned earlier, it's just we're going to be challenged as healthcare institutions with becoming more efficient, more effective, and less labor intensive. We don't want repetitive motion issues. We don't want, tremendous in manpower. We don't necessarily need it. We want to move forward in the 21st century in terms of technology. So there'll be lots and lots more automation in the next 5 years as well.
Yeah. And with the advancement of that technology and changes in water quality standards and implementation of new equipment, oftentimes piling on additional technology just means there's more things that can break, right? And so the importance of this collaboration between these two departments and talking to one another is just going to continue to grow. What about your perspective, Orlando?
I think from my perspective, in New Jersey, Amy's law, and while we've seen many issues in healthcare institutions that are seeing these stainings and have not had, that support background to help them get the type of water quality that they need at their facilities, Amy driving a TIR, technical information report, into a standard. And once that standard is released in the next couple of years, I think that that's going to be additional support for CPD within healthcare institutions, especially in New Jersey where it's law and it's mandated that these criteria or follows are going to be useful and helpful long term for many facilities and many end users in central processing to be able to say, finally, someone's listening to me, because they haven't been for many, many years.
For sure. And with the development of the new standard that's coming out from Amy, that ST108, I think that's going to be big. There are very few departments that are checking all of the boxes from TIR 34. And so as ST108 kind of solidifies some of those recommendations and brings it more out into the light, I think there's going to be a lot of discussions happening between sterile processing departments and their water quality management folks over at the facilities operations side. And so lots of need for this type of thing. Y'all, it is 4:14, so I've got 1 minute to wrap this thing up. I am so sorry for those of you who asked such awesome questions that we didn't have time to get to. Jay and Orlando are great guys, and you'll find their contact information in the speaker bio section on your screen. Please reach out to them either through email or through LinkedIn. I'm sure they would both love to follow up with you in regards to your questions or comments, or feel free to email me as well, and we can continue to talk about those things. Jay and Orlando, thanks so much for taking time out of your workday to share some knowledge and inspire some collaboration between water quality facilities management folks and sterile processing folks. It's a partnership that you all believe in, that I believe in, that I think we need to continue to emphasize across the industry. To our event sponsor, I want to say thank you to Verta Water Quality Systems for making this event possible. I want to say thank you to First Case, our event collaborator, and bringing those CEs to our conference. And I want to thank you, attendees, for spending some time bettering yourself, learning more about water quality, investing in both yourself and in just the patient care offered at your facility, and spreading the knowledge. Don't forget about those downloadable resources on the side of your screen. I want you to check those out, both from Verta Water Quality as well as those bonus CE links. That link in there with instructions about how to get your CE certificate will help guide you through that. But as soon as we end here, you should automatically be directed over to get your CE certificate, and so that should be nice and easy. For those of you who had to step out through the course of the conference today because of some emergency that happened in your department, or somebody needed you to make them a ham sandwich, know that all of these sessions are now available on demand, and so you will be able to go back and watch them in their entirety, or share them with a friend to be able to go check them out at a later date as well. And with all of that said, I want to say thank you for joining us. We'll see you next time, and keep fighting dirty.